What if I told you that what happened at Fiorano shouldn't come to light, but it still leaked into the paddock? Because no one expected Lewis Hamilton to set that level. Much less that Charles Leclerc would react the way he did after seeing the real data of the SF26 in the rain. What exactly did Leclerc see in those laps? And why within Ferrari are there already those who believe that this completely changes the balance of the team? What was revealed after that test? Not only surprised, it could be the beginning of something much bigger. The Fiorano test seemed, on the surface, just another session on the technical development calendar. Ferrari was fulfilling its role with Pirelli, testing the new rain tires under the demands of the 2026 regulation, in a completely controlled environment, with the asphalt artificially wet and stable temperatures that allowed reliable data to be obtained. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that, in theory, justified the attention of the paddock. But that changed the moment Lewis Hamilton took to the track and started spinning the SF26. From the first sessions, what began to be perceived inside the Ferrari box was that this was not a driver in the adaptation phase. Hamilton was not exploring the car like someone who is still looking for references, but rather he was executing laps with a technical clarity inappropriate for someone who had only been working with that car for weeks. And this did not go unnoticed by Charles Leclerc, who closely followed every piece of data, every telemetry, every internal comparison that the engineers were beginning to put on the table. As the day progressed, the volume of information began to grow disproportionately. More than 140 laps in a single day are not common in rainy conditions, much less maintaining a stable pace. But what was truly relevant was not the quantity, but the quality of those laps. Hamilton not only set competitive times, but also repeated records with almost surgical precision, something that is usually extremely difficult in the wet due to the variability of the grip. It is at this point that the revelation that Leclerc then drops in the paddock begins to build. Because when analyzing the data, Ferrari found something that did not fit with the previous story. Hamilton was managing the SF26 energy system better than expected. This car, conditioned by the famous super clipping, requires a very fine reading of the electrical deployment, especially in low grip conditions where each error is costly. However, Hamilton not only avoided these mistakes, but also optimized each acceleration phase, finding performance where, in theory, the car limited it. Leclerc, who knows these limitations perfectly, immediately detects what this means. It is not just a question of talent, but of deep understanding of the car's behavior. And that's where the first point of internal tension arises. Hamilton is understanding SF26 at a level that normally requires several runs, not a private test. That difference, although it is not said publicly, begins to generate a new reading within the team. But there is another element that completes the scenario: the long runs. In a test like this, where the main focus is technical, many drivers tend to prioritize data collection over pure performance. Hamilton did both. Their long runs were not only consistent, but showed controlled degradation and progressive adaptation to each intermediate compound change, something that surprised even the engineers in charge of tire analysis. And this is where Act 1 reaches its key point. Because what Leclerc begins to reveal is not a simple surprise, but a conclusion. Hamilton is not chasing the Ferrari's pace, he is beginning to define it. That is the reading that filters into the paddock, the one that begins to circulate among rival teams, and the one that completely transforms the perception of this test. What should have been a closed, controlled session with no immediate sporting implications becomes the first real indication that Ferrari could be entering a new internal dynamic. One where the balance between its drivers is no longer as clear as it seemed just a few weeks ago. As Fiorano's data began to be analyzed in more depth, what initially seemed like a simple surprise began to transform into a real concern within Ferrari. Because what Charles Leclerc let the paddock glimpse was not only the speed of Lewis Hamilton, but something much more delicate: the difference in the way of understanding the SF26. Within the team, engineers began comparing telemetry beyond lap times. And that was where the data appeared that completely changed the internal narrative. Not only was Hamilton consistent, he was using different power windows, slightly more aggressive braking points, and electric torque management that allowed him to better exit slow corners in low grip conditions. This was not visible to the public, but was visible to those who had access to the data. And that was exactly what ended up impacting Leclerc. Because Leclerc was not being overtaken on a specific lap. He was watching another driver find solutions that he himself had not yet exploited in that car. And that, in a team where he has been the absolute reference for years, completely changes the internal dynamic. What is beginning to be discussed then in the paddock is that Hamilton is accelerating the development of the SF26 without the need for new parts. That is, you are unlocking performance through your piloting and technical understanding. And this has a direct implication. Ferrari could have been far from squeezing all the real potential of the car until now. Furthermore, there is a point that Leclerc drops indirectly, and that generates even more noise. Hamilton's adaptation was not only quick, it was immediate in critical conditions. Rain, changing grip and tires in the experimental phase. This is key because these scenarios usually amplify a car's weaknesses. But in this case, Hamilton managed to neutralize them. And this is where Act 2 becomes much more tense. Because if a driver can do that in a controlled test, the question is inevitable. What will happen when the car evolves and the conditions are real racing? Within Ferrari, this begins to divide interpretations. On the one hand, it is a huge opportunity. They have a driver capable of raising the overall performance of the team. But on the other hand, it introduces a silent conflict. Because Leclerc no longer only competes against external rivals like Red Bull or McLaren. He now has someone within the same garage who could take away his role as technical leader. And that is precisely what the paddock is beginning to smell. Teams like Mercedes and Red Bull, according to what is said in the environment, have not focused so much on Hamilton's time, but on his consistency and the ease with which he seemed to control the SF26. Because that is what is really dangerous. A driver who does not need time to adapt is a driver who can perform from the first race. Leclerc, aware of all this, does not issue a direct warning, but he does leave a clear message between the lines. Ferrari is no longer the same team that entered 2026. And Hamilton is not the driver that many believed after his 2025. The balance has changed. And the most disturbing thing of all is that this change did not occur in a race, nor under media pressure, but in silence within a test that, in theory, no one should take as a competitive reference. The final point of everything that happened in Fiorano is not in the times, nor even in the initial reaction of the paddock. It is in what this causes for the future within Ferrari. Because what Charles Leclerc ends up revealing, although never directly, is that the team is entering a new phase where hierarchies are no longer defined by the past, but by what each pilot is capable of doing right now with the SF26. After analyzing each run, each simulation, and each adjustment made by Lewis Hamilton, the internal conclusion begins to take shape. Ferrari has not only gained experience with a 7-time champion, it has incorporated a driver who can redefine the technical direction of the car. And this is what really changes everything. Because until now, the development of the car revolved largely around Leclerc's sensations and style. It was his reading of the car that showed the way. But after Fiorano, a second reference appears, and it is not just any reference. He is a driver who does not need progressive adaptation, who understands the limitations from the first moment and who, in addition, proposes solutions from driving. This creates a completely new scenario. Ferrari now has 2 possible development paths within the same garage. And that's where Act 3 becomes critical. Because when a team receives contradictory information, 2 styles, 2 ways of exploiting the car, it has to make a decision. Either you try to balance both philosophies, which can slow down progress, or you rely on one of them as your main base. And what is beginning to be sensed in the paddock is that Hamilton, with what he showed in Fiorano, has gained unexpected weight in that equation. Leclerc perceives it, not necessarily as a direct threat in terms of pure speed, but as something deeper, influence. Because if engineers start validating that Hamilton's approach unlocks more performance, the car will evolve in that direction. And in Formula One, when the car changes, everything changes. Furthermore, there is a detail that completes the circle. Hamilton was not only fast and consistent, but he did so without making any relevant errors during almost 900 kilometers of testing in complex conditions. This sends a very clear message to the rest of the paddock. His 2025 does not define his current level. And that forces everyone to rethink their expectations. What Leclerc reveals, therefore, is not just admiration or surprise. It is a silent warning. Ferrari now has a weapon that can upset the competitive order, but also an internal balance that can become unstable if not managed correctly. And this is how a simple test, hidden under the label of tire development, ends up becoming the first big turning point of the 2026 season. Because since Fiorano, the question is no longer whether Ferrari will be competitive. The real question is, who is really going to lead that project when the time comes to fight for everything? And in the end, everything that happened in Fiorano leaves a very clear feeling. This was not a simple test, it was an internal revelation that Charles Leclerc could not ignore, and that ended up leaking to the paddock as a silent warning. Because what Lewis Hamilton showed does not fit with the story we have been hearing. He is not the pilot in reconstruction after a complicated 2025, he is not someone in the process of adaptation. He is a pilot who already understands the SF26, who already knows how to make the most of it and who, most importantly, has shown that he can go beyond what the team itself expected at this point. And that changes absolutely everything. It changes the way Ferrari perceives itself, because it now knows it has a higher ceiling than it thought. It changes the way the paddock looks at the team because it is no longer just another contender. It is a real threat if this level is maintained. And above all, the internal balance changes because Leclerc is no longer the only technical reference within the garage. What he reveals, at its core, is an uncomfortable but fascinating truth. Ferrari has entered a new era without announcing it. An era where Hamilton's talent, experience and ability to adapt can redefine the direction of the project, but also test the stability of the team from within. Because when you have two drivers capable of leading, you don't just compete against the rest, you also start competing with yourself. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.